This is Gabriel, custodian of Watchman Privacy. I know why you're here. You're looking to escape the technocratic apparatuses that you see slowly enveloping you and restraining your freedom. For the fundamentals of privacy, you should start by visiting escapethetechnocracy.com to see my video tutorials, books, and other resources for getting off the surveillance grid. Watchman Privacy and Escape the Technocracy are leading the fight for privacy, and unlike just about any other show, we practice what we preach. Private payment options, no threat modeling, no statist or collectivist solutions, and no sponsors, ever. You know what that means? It means we can speak the unmitigated truth as we see it. Your support alone determines the future of this show. Go support you and me at escapethetechnocracy.com. So there's two types of video games. On the one hand, you have the linear games, right? The games that funnel you in a cinematic, fun way from point A to point B. There's very few bugs. There's very few things that can go wrong. For all intents and purposes, you're on rails. And it's a heck of a ride. But you know it's not going to do but the one single thing. And then there's the open-ended games. The games that are designed for people who like to push the boundaries a little bit. Try to jump out of the area of play. Maybe there's no direction. Maybe there's no preset path. The player wanders. Stories emerge. And there's the possibility that different players have different outcomes. And then there's Dwarf Fortress. Urban, tell us what happened with the butcher cat incident in Dwarf Fortress.
This is a bug that was called cat apocalypse, which is in the game. So you're managing a colony and you need to keep your people happy. And basically it's like you need to keep them well fed and full of beer. You know, wouldn't it be cute if you can have cats in your colony? A cat will adopt one of your character. It's this way that it works, you know, just like in reality, they choose you. And then it's very cute. And what happened is they can reproduce, right? If you have like a female cat. When this happens, you know, you have more and more cats. And this can lead to a very big problem, which is it will literally fill up the entire RAM of your computer with cats. Now you might say, well, what about, you know, isn't there a check or anything? Well, no, it's just running the simulation, right? So now you're faced with a problem that you have like a fortress full of cats and you don't really know what should you do about it. Maybe your natural instinct is, well, why not just butchering them? I mean, it's a video game after all, right? But if you do this, you have like a problem. So first you need a butcher, right? And the other problem is that if a butcher could fall in love for a cat, right? They could be like, oh, it's so cute, and they just don't do it. And if they don't do it, then you know they could you would get back to square one. So the other solution is you could have blind butcher, or hoping that your butcher won't have like remorses. But then remember, if a cat adopted one of your character, you're gonna be in a situation where if your character sees that you're butchering their favorite cat, they're not going to like it, and they might go in a tantrum and they might just start breaking everything. And you can see how this very innocuous, let's call it feature, can quickly spiral out of control and become like a major pain. So the solution is easy: just don't have cat in your fortress and you're gonna be fine.
Welcome to Watchman Privacy Torchlight Chats. This is a special mini-series on video games and their unexpected influence on the world. Today we're discussing a prized video game called Dwarf Fortress. So I'm going to be reading some of the infamous bug reports throughout this conversation, and the source for all of them is tvtropes.org, just for your information. So as you were describing, Urban, people are probably thinking, what the heck is going on here? What is this video game? What's going on? So it's Dwarf Fortress is a game that's been in development for decades at this point. It was created by a couple of guys who wanted to create a procedurally generated game where basically anything and everything can go. It's a simulation game where many different things can happen. And they're basically adding new systems to the game all the time, right? And the basic structure is you're looking at a 2D map, okay? At the beginning, it was really archaic. It was ASCII art. And then there was a Steam version that kind of improved the graphics. But basically, you're looking at a 2D representation of a dwarf fortress, okay? And you have a colony of dwarves, and you can build things, and you can have different systems for the dwarves, and you can have, taverns and all these sorts of things. And basically, your dwarves go exploring, and they tend to have a mind of their own, right? They are their own entities, and they go off and they do things. They have adventures. They go to war. And there's these really bizarre outcomes that can transpire because these creators have layered system on top of system on top of system. So, for example, this is update 47.01. There's a glitch where babies are no longer carried by their mothers, but ride them, as in like mounts, okay, complete with steering them. The pair would eventually starve since babies have zero survival instinct and no concept of where to go. So they just steer their moms around randomly until death. So this is one of the random bugs that can happen while playing this game. So Arben, talk a little bit. Let's try to contextualize this game a little bit. How did you encounter Dwarf Fortress? And what's the best way that you would describe this game to people who are just unfamiliar with it?
I love the Linux terminal. I am a bit of an artist, as you know. And I love art that is done with the terminal, and I love creative things. I love beautiful terminals. I know this sounds weird for majority of people who think, a terminal is just, a blinking cursor and some arcane text. But there are many, many games that used, famously, the early version of Tetris were using the terminal. I was looking at like different exploration RPG games, where you can just explore. I was really into Lord of the Ring, like probably many people. And I was looking at games that were like similar to this, and I had no money. And I found this, there is this simulation of a fortress and you have character, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And I installed it, and then I was like, and it was, this is an old game. Like this has been in development for like years and years and years. And I couldn't get past, I just abandoned it, and I couldn't get past. But I became fascinated by its appeal. Like it's a very bizarre game. Like the way it looks, imagine it's text-based, and you have character, and basically like the letter A means something, the character dot means a wall, and X means where you want to move in the map, etc., etc. You can look on Google Image. And I started to just read the lore of the game because it's fun to read. It's one of those games I never came to play, but I enjoy watching other people play because it's just so hilarious, the things that can happen, So this is how I discovered when I was younger. I never played very long the game, but I know a lot just because I watch a lot of people playing on YouTube, and it's very funny to watch people playing it and reading all sorts of stories. So this is how I discovered it a very long time ago, actually. Then I knew a friend who was really into it, and he was like showing me all sorts of stuff, and he was like, building the pyramids, and you can, even though it seemed like this game seems a bit deceptive because it is a fully three-dimensional game. It's just that you see layers on layers on layers in 2 dimension, but it is technically three-dimensional.
Yeah, so what happens in a game where basically anything goes is that you get these bizarre situations that crop up. And I want to ask you about procedural generation here. But first, this is a game where you can have serial killer elephants, where you can have fortress mayors who sentence themselves to be beaten when their mandates fail, and even request their own assassinations, right? Here's another cat bug, by the way. A possible bug resulted in cats getting drenched in dwarven booze if they came anywhere near a tavern. Then the unfortunate critter cleans itself with its tongue and dies horribly. This was because the amount of liquid in a splash wasn't specified, so each splash was actually an entire pint, resulting in the cat ingesting the gallons and gallons of alcohol potentially spilled on it from a short walk through a bar. So this was one of these famous bug incidents. What is a procedurally generated game, Urban? And maybe even from the developer side, how complex are these? How do these look under the hood?
Probably like a giant mess, knowing I have worked in video games, and let me tell you, it's some of the worst code you can imagine. Just because usually what happens is people want to have as many features. You know, video game developer, they love games usually. They want to play them. So they are just adding feature on feature on feature. And it's barely working to be out and enjoyed by people until the next version comes in. But in a more serious tone, what they are doing, so, you know, in your introduction, you scratch a point where everything now is super sanitized. You know, we want safety everywhere, including in place where there is no danger, like virtual environment. You know, there is literally no danger in a video game, but we still want safety. You know, we want the player not falling into the lava pit, which is ridiculous. We want them to go back on the battle screen. In modern video games, you have thousands and thousands of people who are working. They are making like all this 3D art, and if you want an interaction in your, you know, GTA, Call of Duty, FIFA, like this one you described, you know, the cats licking their paw and getting drunk and then eventually dying from alcoholism.
Not eventually, within seconds.
Okay, within seconds. You would need an animator that is animating the cat. Then you need, like, you know, all those things. You need like to model a cat. You need to make the interaction. You need to make the liquid simulation. But if you're making a text-based game, in one sentence it's done, right? You can just say, well, your cat died from alcoholism in 2 seconds. And that's the end of it. So by using text, they get away with a lot of things. And those games called Emergent gameplay, the base is dozen of tiny interactions. So it's like a cat can walk, can get wet. Wet is liquid. Liquid could be lava, water, alcohol, beer, mud. Then when the cat walks on a surface that is wet, becomes wet with the liquid, etc. You know, so those are very simple rules. In programming, this is very easy to do. And you basically add all those rules together and you end up with something very complicated, very weird sometimes. It's a bit like life in a way, you know. DNA is just a few molecules, right? And a few rules, but it created basically the whole life that we see out there. Same with atoms. You know, atoms, they are those tiny particles, very simple, but then it creates this whole world that we see. So those emergent gameplay mechanics, this is how they do it. And this is why, because they're text-based, most of them are text-based or very simple graphics, they can get away with this. And you have those layers. And what's funny is you cannot always predict the outcome. So for your example, you know, with serial killer elephants, now my assumption is the elephant is an entity, right? And it's an entity, and probably those entity can have all sorts of condition. They could be, you know, psychopathic, happy, serial killer, you know, whatever an entity can have. And because the elephant is derived from this entity, which is also used, I don't know, by zombies or by goblins, then, and the elephant is this, but just with the body of an elephant, you can end up with a serial killer elephant. Even though you never programmed to act this way. It's just like this naturally how it occurs. And this makes it very rich on the stories that you can have.
Yeah, so there's a lot of randomness throughout the game, and you have these, as I said, these systems stacked on top of systems, and the creators admit that sometimes Like they just went to the Wikipedia article for these symptoms of over alcohol consumption, and they just added those to the game. And every creature can get that kind of alcohol poisoning. It's really interesting just how this game was developed, how it came into existence. It was free for a long time. It's still free, and the game developers didn't even want to charge anything until they had like a medical issue, and then they said, "Hey, we should probably start collecting donations or something." So it's certainly a labor of love, and a lot of people have a ton of stories. There's an entire YouTube channel. I'm sure there are multiple, but there's somebody called Krug Smash, and I'll link this, where all he does is he talks about the weird stories that have cropped up in worlds that he's created. Right. For example, right, we talked about how losing is fun in this game. You have all kinds of ways that your dwarf colony can die. For a lot of people, they will accidentally dig too far underground, and there's a river system or there's underground water, and it just floods their entire colony, right? Other funny instances, you have werewolf elk that have infected the entire colony. You can have something called a tantrum spiral, where the grumpiness setting can outweigh happiness and basically spiral all of your dwarfs into this tantrum spiral where they just destroy everything. So there's a lot of bizarre ways that you can lose in this game, and that's kind of part of the fun. Let me, for example, read this other bug story. So for a time, animals were given a few too many sentient traits without actual sentience. And as such, you had animals that had needs which went unfulfilled because they're animals, and thus they got terminally distracted and slowed down all activities because of it. Worse, some of their needs revealed the animals worship gods of their civilization and try to pray to them in temples, but realize they're animals and can't pray, thus being unable to fulfill that need. Even worse, animals in your tavern could actually reveal the location of various artifacts around the world and in the fortress to visitors, somehow getting their locations across without speaking. And worst of all, in World Gen, any animal that becomes a historical figure can actually start acting like a sentient under certain circumstances. So you can occasionally spot saltwater crocodile recruits going around cities, getting bursts of civilized behavior before remembering they're animals and going savage again, including mauling residents of the cities they just civilizedly moved into. So there's a lot of weird things that crop up here. So as we saw in one of our previous episodes on the corrupted blood incident, we had a big company in Blizzard who accidentally introduced a little bit of this randomness into the game, and it basically wiped out the entire game, right? Because everybody was getting sick with this in-game illness that they hadn't planned for. And of course, eventually Blizzard, they shut down all the servers, they reset everything, and it went back to normal. But it was fun for a few days. Now, the entire premise of Dwarf Fortress is that this stuff happens every time, right? Every time you start the game, you expect something like this to happen. What's the fun in a game like that, Urban? The fun of losing. Because it's just two developers and not some giant corporation with real world money that is, involved in the game, they can afford to have this kind of fun and actually have an entire game where losing is kind of the point.
Video games nowadays, they are made. It's not just hundred of developers and all of this, but it's also, when you look, there is market research, and it's like they want to keep the game engaging. And if the player is losing after 2 minutes because there is drunken cats, that's like, your typical, for later accounting firm will not like you, will say, you cannot have a game like this. So there is a lot of pressure, not just from the technology itself that is very, very complicated, but also from, all sorts of level of management, investor, bankers, all those things that can basically influence a video game that people don't really have. And in the case of this game, it's just two people. They only answer to their community, and their community loves it. So they just continue. And that is as simple as this. They are very limited with resources, so they are forced to keep things very simple for themselves and to keep things maintainable. And I think this agility makes this game viable. And it also shows to people that, you don't need AAA graphics, 4K resolution to enjoy a game and to have to be a successful game developer. As a fun side story, I've taught a lot of people video game development, and usually my first exercise for everybody who wants to go in game design is make a text adventure game. And nobody likes it, but I'm like, if you cannot stomach doing a text adventure game, how are you know, everything else with three dimension and this and that is just the same but more complex. What's also funny is if you see how Dwarf Fortress started, it started as a simulator for their 3D game. So there are like a few interviews that the creator did where they explained that they wanted to make basically, you know, one of those open game RPG, you know, 3D fancy graphics, but they needed something simpler to try out gameplay before, right? So then they just wrote this text adventure thing, which eventually became the game. And the other one, I'm not sure what happened, but it was, yeah, I don't know what happened. So this shows you the very stark contrast between modern AAA development and some indie game. And for me, this is like, there is also, you know, a corporatization of indie games. When I see something like Dwarf Fortress, I know it's pure indie game, you know. It's just people, and they make it for fun. I will say this to people. I believe video games should be fun. And sometimes we lose this a bit when we are doing, you know, those game.
It's an excellent point, and something like Dwarf Fortress, some imagination is required, right? It doesn't have fancy graphics. It's a lot of people, if they look it up based on what we're saying, they might scoff at it for being so looking so primitive. But if you click into various the many tabs, there's dozens and dozens of tabs and things of this sort. You can start to look at the personalities of the dwarfs, and you can actually read a script of what's happening in the game, even though it doesn't exactly show that. So there's a level of imagination required for a game like this. It reminds me also of you have StarCraft, okay, the original StarCraft, 1998, the real-time strategy game, one of the first competitively played video games, and you have StarCraft 2, which was made about 10 years later. And what's amazing about these two games is the first StarCraft, it came out in a time where you couldn't really update a game, right? There's no patches coming in, there's no balance updates, and because of that, everybody just develop their own kind of balance, right? There's 3 different races you can play as, and basically what happened was they would change certain maps so that they would favor one or the other, and people would simply learn how to beat the other race and some of the nasty tricks that they had, and it became one of the greatest competitive games of all time. And then StarCraft 2 came out, and this game came out during the age of always online, and so from the very start you had all these balance updates, and then there was 1, and then there was 2, and then there were dozens and hundreds of all these balance updates, people complaining about this and that. There's a story to be learned where if you just keep it simple, like you don't even update it necessarily, you can have, you can certainly adapt to what the game offers, I think is kind of the message that I'm trying to explicate there. So you mentioned that it was community driven. I want to read this bug report here. This one's called the Mad Hammerer. So the Mad Hammerer, which is one of the creator's favorite bugs, was where a hammerer carries out death sentences by striking the prisoner with a hammer. If unable to wield a hammer, okay, if the hammerer is unable to wield a hammer due to both arms being broken, for example, he would instead bite the subject to death and walk around with the person's bitten off limbs in his mouth forever until they started to rot. Okay, so that's the Mad Hammerer. So talk a little bit, Urban, about the community-driven development of this particular game, as opposed to some of the the corporate stuff that happens these days. There's a whole community surrounding this, and the developers are directly beholden to the people who are making it. It's a FOSS game, as far as I understand. It's just a completely different mindset for a lot of the way that Ubisoft games are being made and released with all their DRM and approved and vetted by all these committees and things of this sort. It's kind of a breath of fresh air, isn't it?
Yeah, in a way, I would say it's the video game equivalent of Watchman Privacy Podcast. No sponsor.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
No, I believe you can only be master to one. And if you're master to, BlackRock investment or this bank or this big studio, then you're gonna make the game they want, not the game you want or that your community wants. And this echoes back to what I was saying. they were not even really interested with money. Now they always accepted donations, and you could always, I think you could pay for the game. It's just that you could download it for free. And I mean, in a sad way, as you said, I think one of them had some health issue, and then they had to be a bit more commercial. But even though I think they said once that they would continue to make this game as long as people were paying a monthly donation to them, and if people stop paying them, then they will do something else. And that's as simple as that. And as long as people enjoy the game, they get a living, and that's quite remarkable. There are a few other software that are like this. Another one that comes to my mind is the 3D software Blender, which is almost entirely community driven. That is like an open source. This one is an open source project, and it's basically a small studio, a small movie studio that is creating it. But they have this huge community around them, and they keep it simple. No big sponsor, no, mostly people, and then they make products, and they have all sorts of products around it that they sell. I think it is a viable option. We spoke a few times about, in our course especially, about how do you earn money, how do you earn Bitcoin, or it doesn't matter, which currency, but those things shows, for a long time they just had a PayPal link and it was the end of it, right? People, I guess, they really like the game, and they got basically their life works was this project. And I think it probably has a bigger impact than those AAA studio, because you're gonna keep a small community of people really happy. And I think this matters more than having a game that is played by million, but no one really cares, and everybody will just jump to the next one. And also, what you mentioned about StarCraft, it reminds me of Fortnite, where they had dedicated player who mastered a certain skill, and then the video game studio deemed this skill to be like cheating, not really cheating, but like, oh, this was too easy. Maybe it was not Fortnite. Maybe it was another one. I don't remember. Okay, so allegedly, right? And then the studio just changed everything, and it devastated the community, because now you had people who invested time and effort into learning and mastering a skill, just to find themselves that this was deemed, not okay by the studio. But there are examples of big game company that are doing similar stuff as Dwarf Fortress. So maybe we could discuss like some of those aspects that are like found in other games. And one that comes to me is The Witcher, especially the tax collection in The Witcher. So in the game The Witcher 3, made by CD Red Projekt, the famous Polish video game maker.
CD Projekt Red.
Sorry. There was a bug where players could get endless gold by, I'm not sure the exact mechanism, but they could basically like scam villager. It was a bug, and just get a lot of gold, and by selling something. And instead of removing the gold from the inventory of players, or punishing the player, or banning the players, or just fixing in the most stupid way, what they did is they added a new character, which is the tax collector. And if they detect that you're using this cheat, this bug, you have this guy that comes to you and say, hey, do you have any income that is not declared? And you're like, oh no, and you have like a little dialogue. And basically at the end, if they will find you and take like half of the money you earn in this way. And I think this is a brilliant way to solve sometimes those issues, instead of going with the iron fist and, in the most stupid way, why not just making it a bit emergent and having some fun with the players, and I would say most people would love things like this, And the other aspect, Gabriel, is, if you look at the serial killer elephant, imagine if this was in a AAA game. I could see, you would have the politically correct crowd of people being outraged. You would have the animal defense people being outraged. You'd have all sorts of people being outraged. When you have a small community of an obscure ASCII-based game, text-based game, no one really cares outside of the player, and the player enjoy it, because at the end of the day, it's just a game.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think I mentioned the game was FOSS. That's clearly not the case. It's not FOSS, but it is free, and the creators do take a ton of input from the people who are playing the game. All right, here's another little bug report. So once you have a justice system set up and some open cases to pursue, you can actually interrogate the dead. Okay, this was a bug. Your captain of the guard will head to the spot in which the person died and drag seemingly nothing to their office for interrogation. Not only did the dead person answer, they seemed even more susceptible to perp sweating. I think this is where you start sweating if you are the perpetrator. The dead person was even more susceptible to perp sweating when interrogated and immediately spilled every bean that they had. So again, Urban, this is an example of procedural generation. Talk a little bit about what that is, how that works in a game.
Yeah, so procedural generation, this is something that is used by AAA game as well, But again, there is like multiple ways to do it. When you create content, it's of course very hard and very time consuming. So maybe you could instead create a world based on some mathematical rules. And the simplest one could be, for instance, just make a flat surface and every few miles create a building that can be a city or a settlement. That would be like an example. Now, procedural world generation can be very, very complex. And in the case of Dwarf Fortress, they use things like erosion, sedimentation. I think you said they even simulate the climate that is changing with the season, the impact of the weather. So in the game, you have this very rich history where you have like a river that created a small canyon, and then a civilization built a temple inside, but later on it was flooded and now it's a lake. But if you dive in the lake, you will see the remnant of this civilization. And every time you play the game, it's going to be completely different. This is like the way this is done is you basically create random numbers, right? And then it's actually, in a way, it's similar to a Bitcoin wallet. You have a seed, which is not a seed phrase, but it's a world seed, which is a bunch of words that is used to generate it. And then just like your Bitcoin wallet can generate the next address and the next address, this will generate the next square mile of terrain or whatever you decided. It could be the next chunk of terrain, and it's going to decide if there are trees, if there are forests, if there are desert, etc., etc. And on top of that, you can then add, once you created like this basic layers, you can create like the physical simulation of the water running, the rivers creation, etc., etc. Because it's text-based, you can make very detailed, very intricate simulation because you do not need any graphics at all. You can just describe what happened, which is why it's so powerful. And yeah, so that is procedural generation. For people who are interested, the early game that used this technique were called roguelikes, rogue game, and this is what has given us Diablo. Yeah. So yeah, the rogue games that were ASCII based, and then you had like a whole generation of those things, and those were like the early procedurally generated games. Some of them has, one of this branch has given, the colony type simulator like Dwarf Fortress and others. Another one has given like Diablo and other things. And it's if you want to look and if you're interested into this type of game. A AAA game, they of course use this as well a lot, and sometimes they also do like erosion and things like this. I will say the difference, if we compare, and is that in many cases, Dwarf Fortress I think beats them because the world is really rich. You know, the example I've given in the beginning is okay. So we have a world that is generated procedurally, and every few kilometers you have a new city. That is a very boring world, you know. And we have seen in those, you know, like things like No Man's Sky at the beginning. Oh, you can explore 100 billion stars, but they all look the same, and you know there is nothing to do there. In the case of Dwarf Fortress, literally every inch of the terrain is gonna be simulated, and you're gonna have things. Now, it's not for everyone. I'm not saying to recommend you to like spend hours and hours in this game, but it's certainly worth, you know, watching a few YouTube video of the gameplay to get some of it. And by the way, there is a Steam version that has improved graphics and it is a bit more mainstream. You know, now that the game is more fleshed out, and ironically, it circled back to what they wanted to do initially. You know, and now that they have more money and more means, they can do a bit better graphics.
One other question here for you, Urban, as we wind down here. But first, another bug in which it was possible for your trade posts to spontaneously explode. Why? Well, because people turn up to trade carrying bags of magma. My question is, what are some of the cool things that people have created, the structures that people have created within Dwarf Fortress?
So, despite of its very basic and limited graphics, you can build anything you want in there. And this was one of those first type of game where you could literally, you know, it's a bit like a Lego thing, layers by layers. And you had people building recreation of like the Great Pyramids of Gizeh, or the Machu Picchu, or, you know, some real life, you know, cathedral. And people did all sorts of very complex things. I remember the my friend that you know was very fan of this game. He built the Coliseum, and then after that he built the U.S. Congress with the dome on top of it, and all of this in ASCII art, and not just in ASCII art, but again, it's a game of research and it's a survival game. So, you know, it's not just that you can go in a text editor and start, you know, building your thing. No. You need to dig in the granite. You need to, you know, make the beer so that your colonists are happy, and all of those things. In the early days, this was also very easy to share because it's text-based, so it's very simple to share this data, you know, by email, by things like a bulletin board and forums, and people would share their creation and what they accomplished in that game. And mind you, this was in the early 2000s that this was already happening. You know, all the world building things that we have seen later on, those are just building on the shoulder of this giant that is Dwarf Fortress.
So here at the end of Dwarf Fortress, people might still be saying, well, but has this really influenced the world? There was a player of Dwarf Fortress. His name was Marcus Persson. We know him as Notch. He would go on to create the best-selling video game of all time, citing Dwarf Fortress as a major inspiration for his game. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about this game, and not just the game, but an infamous server on the game known for its extreme anarchy, where everything is acceptable except hacking the server itself. A server that has played such a role in the world that it literally led to new pathfinding algorithms that are used in Google Maps. We'll see you on the next episode.